Hi everyone. In this video, I am going to talk about resin and the things associated with resin. What is resin? Resin material can include both solid and highly viscous materials, but commonly refers to liquids which harden based on heat, which is an exothermic reaction, setting agents, or light. The main use of resin is to be a glue, to transfer stress between the fibers and clasp them together and protect them from the outside factors. There are a lot of natural resins found on our planet, like amber and shellac. However, the resin that we are going to use are not natural resins. These resins come in two parts. There's usually a hardener and a resin, part A and part B. We need to mix these two together to form a highly viscous mixture and work with it. Please note that the resin and hardener should look absolutely clear. How much resin do we require for our project? Well, that depends on the area of your project. If it is a circle, the formula is pi r square. If it's a square or a rectangle, then it's length into breadth. The figure that you will get is the amount of resin in grams which you will require to do one very thin layer of resin coating. How do you mix resin part A and part B? All resin brands mention the mixing ratio on their packaging. In this particular resin, it mentions that the ratio is 100:35, which means that for every 100 grams of resin, you should add 35 grams of hardener. The ratio varies from product to product and brand to brand. Most art resin brands come in three ratios: 3:1, 2:1, and 1:1, which are viscous, medium viscous, and highly viscous respectively. To mix the resin, we must put the hardener first and then the resin. You will require a weighing scale for that. You will notice that resin gets foggy when you mix the hardener and resin together. We need to mix this with a plastic or a reusable spatula, slowly and making sure that you're not adding bubbles in the process. Scrape the sides and the bottom thoroughly and do not move the spatula vertically, as that adds bubbles. I have shown this process in the videos ahead. Make sure that your resin is streak-free and clear. You must leave it aside for a bit so that the bubbles can escape. How do you mix colors? Mixing colors is very simple. We can use paste pigments, powder pigments, or some specially made lacing pigments, metallic pigments, powder or mica pigments into our resin. However, the total amount of these colorants should not exceed 2 to 7% of the total weight of resin that you have mixed. What is pot life? It is the amount of time for an initial mixed viscosity to double or quadruple. Timing starts from the moment the product is mixed. Therefore, if the pot life of a resin is 60 to 90 minutes, it means that the clock begins from the moment you poured both parts into a container to mix. It is the amount of time that you have within which you can pour your resin and mix your colors and make your design. It is also called the working time or open time. This is the time before curing process starts and the resin becomes hard or stiff to work with. Working time can be affected by heat. It decreases the working time. How should we prepare for resin work? We should always be in a well-ventilated room. We can spray water in the room 30 minutes before we start working. We can keep our workstation ready with all the tools and materials that we require. Therefore, plan your color palettes. Make sure all the surfaces are leveled. And mixing your resin should be the last step of preparation. We can also keep things like paper tapes or painter tapes, silicone, latex, etc. to cover our sides and back of the project. And these can be removed easily after the resin is dry to touch, even if it has not cured completely. I've done a demo of the same in the videos ahead. Surfaces on which you can pour resin: acrylics, watercolors, oil paint, photos, inkjet prints, spray paints, glass, metal, wood, flowers, rocks. All of these are suitable for resin. However, you cannot pour resin over plastic, silicone, plexiglass, vinyl papers or vinyl sheets, wax paper, butter papers or parchment sheets, as resin will not be able to adhere to these surfaces. One might ask, is ventilation important? A good quality resin does not have fumes or VOCs. However, please work in a well-ventilated area. How can we protect our resined project from dust? I'm giving you an example of this coaster that I had poured. This is the top of an empty box, and I'm just going to cover my project with a box like that. If your project is bigger, you will have to make a sort of a border around your project and cover it. Make sure that the top of the box or the cover does not touch the resin, because if anything touches the resin while it's curing, it will leave an indent or an impression within the resin. It will also protect it from dust, from flies, or any unwanted objects in the air. How do we get rid of bubbles? Mix the resin slowly at room temperature. Do not move the spatula vertically. Allow some time for the bubbles to reach the surface and hopefully burst themselves. In case that does not happen, use a heat gun or a torch from a safe distance. We should try and pour our resin slowly. We can keep the cup close to the surface and make thin layers, because thin layers usually don't get a lot of bubbles. Most brands have self-leveling resins, but it is important to level the surface that we are going to work on to avoid unnecessary spills. Warm and dry conditions are conducive for resin work and curing. In India, 27 degrees to 35 degrees is usually all right. Humidity should be below 50%, and one must make sure that the temperature remains stable throughout the curing process. If the temperature does not stay stable and it fluctuates, the resin will cure inconsistently and form dimples. The first 24 hours are very crucial. When can you recoat or apply a second layer? Most brands mention this on their packaging. However, 24 hours is sufficient for most resins. Please do check with the brand also. If the resin has cured completely and needs a fresh coat, how can you do it? For example, you used a normal art resin and the full cure time of the art resin is 72 hours. For this, you will have to let it cure for 72 hours and then take an 80 grit sanding paper, sand the surface and wipe it with a clean cloth. It is ready for your next pour. Cover it and let it cure completely for the next 72 hours.